Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, which features stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life story for present-day listeners and for the generations to come. Our entire collection is available at voicesofoklahoma.com. By subscribing to our podcast, you will be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. So now listen to another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com.
Dr. Keith Ballard's education career started in Coweta, Oklahoma in 1972. 2 years later, he moved to Oologah, Oklahoma, where he was a teacher, assistant high school principal, administrative assistant, assistant superintendent, and then superintendent as of 1986. Dr. Ballard joined Claremore Public Schools as superintendent in 1992, and then became the executive director of the Oklahoma State School Boards Association in 2000, where he served for 8 years. He has served as an adjunct professor of school law for Southern Nazarene University and Oral Roberts University. Ballard retired from Tulsa Public Schools after 7 years as superintendent. He spearheaded Project Schoolhouse, which addressed changing student populations and school building utilization. Due to Keith's battle with ALS, his speech has been affected, but he is very understandable as he discusses this challenge in his life of education. Our thanks to Keith for sharing his story with the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com.
Well, my name is John Earling, and today's date is January 15th, 2021. So, Keith, would you state your full name, please?
Keith Edward Ballard.
And your date of birth?
July 23rd, 1949.
And your present age?
71.
As we're recording this, I'm in our office here of voicesofoklahoma.com. And where are you as we record this by phone?
I am sitting at my desk at home. I am pretty much confined now to working from home. And I'm actually sitting at a desk that I built whenever I was 15 years old.
Wow.
And it's a direct result of one of my all-time favorite teachers, an industrial arts teacher at Kiowa High School, where I graduated along with my 31 of us graduated together. Most of us started kindergarten together. So anyway, I had an industrial arts teacher. I really had no ability in that area, but I had an industrial arts teacher that had a great impact on me and on decisions that I made later in life.
Yeah, amazing.
And it was because of him that I built this desk that I am sitting at right now.
Yeah. When
I was 15 years old. Truly, I do not have the ability to do that. But thanks to Mr. McGinley, I did it.
Yes, and that's amazing. And it stood up all these years, despite the fact you felt you weren't good at carpentry.
That's right.
Right. And so, but right now, and your home is in what town? Where is your home?
I moved to Claremore when I left Oologah and I became superintendent here. We leased a house for a year, and then we built this house, and all of my kids were living here when they graduated from Claremore High School.
You have faced many challenges in your life, in your career, but you are facing a challenge today that would be, I would imagine, the biggest. And we're going to talk about it a little bit now, then we'll get into your story, and then we'll conclude with a bit about it as well. What was the first sign that you knew something just wasn't right?
Well, we had gone to Sweden to visit our youngest son and his 3 kids. And that was in February. And they had just had a baby in mid-January. we went to Sweden to see the new baby. And my son is principal of the International English School in Örebro, Sweden. He's very outdoors type, and along with his two older kids, we went on the most arduous hikes. We had an absolutely great time. I was coming off a time when I had walked 180 consecutive days of 10,000 steps or more. I was in great shape. We had a great time in Sweden, and we returned in late February. And then I just began to notice around the 1st of March that I was beginning to feel just off a little bit. And I was feeling kind of lightheaded, and my gait was off. I was walking a tremendous amount. And walking my dog, which I absolutely love to do. And I just began to notice around the 1st of March that things weren't quite right. And, of course, with the COVID scare going on, the first thing that my doctor did, and I see Dr. Beasley at OU, and the first thing that I did was they had me go get a COVID test. And it proved to be negative. And so, but it just kept getting worse from there. And I began to see a number of doctors. Dr. Beasley, for whom I have the utmost respect and personal like for, was very concerned. And at one point, they actually diagnosed me with pneumonia, and they treated that, but things just did not get better. And late summer, I'm very busy and very active in my yard. I take great pride with all of my flowers, and actually I overplant, I overdo, but it's something that I really enjoy, as well as my tomato plants. And I had 2 or 3 falls, really nasty falls, outside working, and so I continued to see, and at one time I was involved with 5 different doctors, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. And then ultimately they said, okay, I had some tests done with the neurologist. He was also affiliated with OU, and they couldn't turn anything up. So they said, okay, we're sending you to the Mayo Clinic. My first thought was, yeah, right. Nobody gets in the Mayo. It's very difficult. But I will say that my doctors, with the assistance from my wife of 49 years, they wrote a really nice letter just about what I had done in Tulsa. And I don't know that really influenced anything, but it was a really nice letter. And the next thing I know, I'm scheduled to go to the Mayo Clinic in September. And my wife and I actually drove up to Lake Superior and walked all around and hiked all around. Although I was unstable and off balance, just being careful, I was able to do all of that. And then it really began to go downhill. I saw doctors at Mayo in September, in October, and then the final diagnosis came in December.
And that diagnosis is?
ALS.
Also known as Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yes. And there could be some other complicating factors. Just last week, I started seeing a doctor, and he is an ALS specialist in Oklahoma City, and he suspects some brain degeneration that also is impacting this. But today I'm very weak, and I require a walker to get around. So you're right, John. It is the biggest challenge of my life for me personally. And there's a reason that I say that. And I met yesterday with a physical therapist that I've been seeing for a couple of months now, and he is working on a wheelchair, a very elaborate wheelchair that meets a lot of needs. And you can tell that my voice is off. I always prided myself on being a really good public speaker. In fact, speech was one of my majors in undergraduate. Speech and psychology, I had a double major. Little did I know that I would be superintendent in Tulsa one day, Tulsa Public Schools, but I think that undergraduate work in speech and psychology probably helped that.
Yeah. Well, I admire you taking on this assignment here of oral history, but I want you to know that your speech is very clear, and those who are listening to this can understand you. There's not a problem there. So thank you.
Good.
So let's begin here and talk about your parents, your mother's name and her maiden name, where she was born and where she grew up.
My mother grew up, and I'm really glad that you're wanting to talk about my parents, because I had an amazing family. I really did. I absolutely adored my parents, and they were absolutely great parents. My mother grew up on a farm with 8 siblings. There were actually 9 siblings. One died shortly after he was born. But she grew up on a farm near Hazleton, Kansas. I grew up in Kiowa, Kansas, and it's only 6 miles from Hazleton to Kiowa, and my parents moved there to put my sister and I in Kiowa schools. I started kindergarten there, but my mother, specifically back to her, she was a terrific mother, and she was very active as a child, riding horses. My grandfather had a very active farm. He tilled the ground, and they had a huge cattle operation, several horses, and I grew up on that farm as well. But my mother and my father married very young, while they were still in high school at the age of 17. They had 2 kids, by the time they were 19, and a third at 21. We were a very close-knit family. The church was important to my family. I swear that I was in church before I was a week old, and it was just standard procedure that we were in church every Sunday. My parents were warm and loving, and although my father never really had you asked about my mother. If it's okay, I'm going to move into my father.
Okay, Keith, let me just ask you your mother's name first. What was her name?
Norma Jean Gates.
Okay, and then
Norma Jean Gates Ballard.
And then your father's name?
William Edward Ballard.
All right. Now, yes, and now talk about your father.
Okay, my dad was an extraordinarily bright guy. He really was. But they were married young, and they had these kids, and they totally dedicated their lives to their kids. They were great parents. My father did whatever work he could get in Kiowa. To say that we grew up poor would be accurate. We did, as far as having things. We did grow up poor, but we grew up rich. It was a very strong, loving family, very supportive. My dad actually worked just whatever he could find. They were determined not to leave Kiowa, and it was a great place to grow up. For a good period of time, my father was the janitor at school where I went. And my father had an enormous IQ, and I'm not exaggerating that. He was absolutely a brilliant guy, and he really found his place in the church and was a leader in the church. But and I'm serious about this. He was such a person of well-read, high IQ, and he swept the floors in the schools at Kiowa, Kansas, in order to ensure that his kids would have a bright future. John, I swear that I really believe that my parents began talking about college when we were in the crib. That's all I ever heard. Not all I ever heard. There was a huge emphasis on you will go to college. And we all did. But there are other things that I want to say about my family, but I'm going to stop there and let you ask the questions.
Curious, the church you attended, what denomination was it?
Methodist.
Okay. And you name your brothers. Did you have brothers and sisters? Your siblings?
Yes. I had an older sister, a little over a year older than me, Connie Jean Ballard, and I had a younger brother. We were so close, and we played sports together. We were very active in sports. We were all three really good students. I don't want to sound braggadocious, but that was the expectation from my parents. My brother and I were extremely close, and sadly, he got cancer and died at the age of 20. It was a monumental moment in my life. I was so upset. I was so emotional. I can't begin to stress how close-knit my family was. And my older sister was kind of the commander of the corps, and she was a fabulous older sister. My brother was a very good athlete. He went to college on a football scholarship, but he could have gone on a basketball scholarship. And he was a very good student as well. And he got cancer and died at the age of 20. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this, John. On his deathbed, 2 days before he died, I was teaching in Coweta at the time, and we had gone home for the weekend, and we knew that he was likely going to die soon. And so he called me into his bedroom. This is very impactful. While I have not the sharpest memory with this ALS, I can still remember it like it was yesterday. He called me in and said that he wanted to talk to his brother, and he's lying there on his deathbed, and he told me that he really appreciated the fact that all of us siblings, were so close, so protective of each other, very loving to each other. And he said, I'm not going to be able to go on. You have to accept that I'm going to go to heaven very soon. And while I don't want you to live your life for me, I want you to do really well in your life. What is too bad is I believe that you and I would have always been connected in some way. And actually, he was one semester short of graduating from college. And what he had decided that he was going to do, he was going to teach and he was going to coach, but he was going to live in Kiowa, and on the side, he was going to keep the agriculture part going. That's what his will was. It had a huge impact on me. It was motivating for me for the rest of my life to do well, because I was not only representing myself, but I was representing my precious brother. My sister and I remained extremely close. And my brother's name was William Joseph Ballard, okay, but he went by Joe. Yes. Joe Ballard. My sister and I remained extremely close over the years. My sister started out as a home ec teacher. She was a wonderful cook, and she really enjoyed that. She ended up being a librarian, and she moved to Topeka, Kansas. We remained extremely close until she died of cancer a few years ago. Right before I took over at Tulsa Public, my sister died. And both of my parents, my father died fairly young. My mother lived into her 80s, and I actually moved my mother to assisted living here in Claremore, where I live. And so she got to be a part of our lives at the end. I will sum all this up by saying I was absolutely blessed with a splendid home life. Yes. Did we have money? No, we did not. Yep. But we had opportunities, and I went to work on the farm when I was really very, very young. And my brother and I ran a hay truck, and we never wanted. And we never wanted because there were ample opportunities. I had uncles who were involved in agriculture. I had grandfathers who were involved in agriculture, and I grew up hauling hay. I grew up herding cattle. I grew up driving a tractor. I don't even know how old I was when they put me on the tractor, but I had a blessed upbringing. No, we didn't have money, but we had everything else. We had the church, and I believe that laid the foundation for my future success. My father always talked about all of his kids going to college. 2 graduated, a third was 1 semester short. I'm glad that you led with my family, John, because it had a huge impact on my life.
Yes. Tell me, obviously, you went to school in Kiowa. And when you were in high school in Kiowa?
Yeah.
And were you a standout student there? Were you involved in lots of activities?
I was a good student. I was very involved in athletics. I was a 3-sport letterman. We had an undefeated high school football team. We had an excellent basketball team. We did well. And I ran the half mile in track, and I actually qualified for the state track meet. And to do that, you had to win at regional or place in the top 3. I actually won at regional, and I also was a very good student. I really was. But there were only 31 people in my graduating class, and we were all good students. We were blessed with absolutely wonderful teachers, phenomenal teachers. We had an English teacher who taught us to love literature, who taught us to write well. I had math teachers who were unbelievable. I prided myself all the way through my career on being an excellent, and I don't overstate that, excellent typist. And it was because of Julia Fritzy, who taught me to type in the 10th grade. And it served me really, really well. I had a phenomenal education. And yes, I was a very good student. And I was very involved in extracurricular activities to the hilt. I've already said what I did, and it was a very active life because we were also very involved in the church. I actually had a neighbor of mine say to me a couple of years ago. He said to me, Keith, you're one of the most successful persons ever to come out of Kiowa. What do you attribute it to? And I said, well, I wasn't the most successful person. That's the language that he used to come out of Kiowa. Look at you, Craig. You're a medical doctor. You are an MD. There were legions of people who came out of Kiowa. And the reason is threefold. First of all, we had absolutely great parents in Kiowa, Kansas, and we did. And secondly, we had a great school system, and we really had good teachers, John. We really did. One of my best friends, his dad was the superintendent there, and they just ensured quality teachers. And the third reason that I gave him that people were very successful coming out of Kiowa, Kansas, was the church. Those three things were very instrumental in my growing up.
What year did you graduate from high school?
1967, the class of 67, and they have rallied around me. I mean, you wouldn't believe. We had a class reunion via Zoom about 2 weeks ago, and most of them showed up. Every day, I get some kind of communication from a classmate. We were extremely close-knit. The class of 67, we took great pride in all of our accomplishments, and my classmates have been very successful, and we still talk about that undefeated football team. We didn't have the state playoffs, or it would have taken a really good team to deny us a state championship. 40 years after we graduated, they invited us back, and Labor Day, they have a big parade down Main Street, and they had the football team from that year, and the graduating class of 67 and the underclassmen who played, including my brother, who was a better athlete than I. So it was a great time. It was a great place to grow up in, and it's no wonder that legions of kids were very successful because of home, because of church, and because of school.
Yes. After you graduate high school in 67, then you go on to college. And where was that?
I went to Fort Hays State, and the reason that I chose Fort Hays State was that my sister went there. My sister and I were very, very close. She was only one grade ahead of me. And so we were, as you can tell, John, all of my siblings, the three of us, were extremely close, very loving with each other. And my sister had gone to Fort Hays State. I was a little bit leery about college, although I was a good student. But it was, I grew up in an environment where we didn't do much other than work and school. We didn't go on vacations, and we were very close knit. I've already established that. So I followed my sister to Fort Hays State, and she got me a job working in the cafeteria system where she worked, and I did that for all 4 years in college.
So that was in Hays, Kansas. And what was your major at Fort Hays State?
I had a double major, psychology and speech.
Were you planning to follow that pursuit in psychology and speech, or was there a point here that you started thinking about education? When does all that happen?
Well, that is a very interesting question. And, oh, by the way, I was president of the senior class at Fort Hays State. But that is really a good question, John, because I really thought that I wanted to major in psychology, and I wanted to pursue a career. And in my junior year, we visited an institution that I was being prepared to work in, and I was really unsure at the time, and that I really wanted to pursue that. So I went back and I talked to my advisor, who was a psychology professor at Fort Hays State. And I still remember where I was sitting in that office, And I told him I was midterm of my junior year. And I said, while I've enjoyed the classes, I don't think that I want to pursue a career as a psychologist. I already had enough hours for the major, John. And he said to me, well, what do you like, Keith? I still remember that so well. And I actually had a mental picture of this one teacher that inspired me to build the desk, my shop teacher. And I said, well, I really liked school. I really liked my teachers. And he said, well, do you want to be a teacher? And I said, maybe. Now, I'm going to stop here and say that I absolutely love Fort Hays State because they were about children. And I've been inducted into their Alumni Hall of Fame. And it was a great honor for me to go back right in that parade with my wife. They only named 5 or 6 each year, but they did everything around the best interests of their students. It was a phenomenal place to get a college education. And when I said, I really liked school, and he said, do you want to be a teacher? And I said, maybe. That is very appealing to me. I've already said this. I was halfway through my junior year. There was no way that I would have been able to get all the classes in without them going to extreme measures to help me. My brother had cancer at the time. It was a very difficult time in my life. I was changing majors, and Fort Hays State did everything they could to help me. And in fact, they actually assigned me to teach in an area that I wasn't really certified to teach in. That was history, so that I could stay in Hays, because while I was doing my intern teaching, I had to take classes in order to graduate on time. I owe a tremendous gratitude, debt to Fort Hays State University for helping me in any way that they could. And I go back and I talk to students. I've heard from people in the alumni division already. In fact, the lady who heads up the alumni division is planning on coming to Claremore to visit with my wife and I. I've stayed very active in the Alumni Association at Fort Hays State. I can't say enough about how grateful I am for the college education that I got and for the way they moved things around to help me at the end of my college career.
So then your degree is in education then from Fort Hays State?
Yes, with a major in psychology and speech.
Okay. So you mentioned your wife, and we need to bring your wife in here because she was instrumental in your education world as a profession. Your wife, Christy, how did you meet her?
Well, I wish you could see my face. I actually broke into a smile when you mentioned Christy. We had a huge WKY teen hop, and I grew up in a sparsely populated part of the country. And WKY would come down and have what they called a teen hop at the Legend at the Legion Hall every year. It was around Labor Day. And so I just graduated from high school, and kids would come from all around to go to the teen hop. And there would be a huge number of kids. So I'm going about my business, enjoying the evening, and my brother came up to me, and his exact words were, I really remember where we were standing in the Legion Hall at Kiowa, Kansas, and he said to me, "You're not going to believe our luck tonight." And I said, "How so?" And he said, "I just met two twins, and they are really good looking. They're a lot of fun, and we have had a really good time this evening. And they're from Burlington." And then he paused and he said, "And they have an older sister who is really good looking. I've already met her." And so he walked over and he said, "There she is." And he was right. She was really good looking. She was dancing with somebody. And at the end of the dance, her sisters were there, the twins, and they introduced us. She was actually dating a guy, but we really hit it off. We've been married 49 years. She is a huge fundamental part of the success that I have had in life. She has really kept me grounded. She ensured she was a librarian all of those years. Started out as an English teacher, but very quickly she got her master's degree in library science and moved into the library. She was an extraordinary educator. She is a fabulous mother. Without her, I would not have had the success that I did. And I mean that so sincerely. She kept me grounded. She ensured that I knew what the world looked like from a teacher's viewpoint. She is a phenomenal person, a wonderful Christian lady, and we've been married 49 years. And frankly, I hope that I survived ALS. I'm not trying to be macabre. I'm not trying to be overly emotional. I intend to survive it, and I intend for Christy Castle Ballard and I to have a huge celebration on our 50th wedding anniversary. I can't say enough good about her.
I just point out that WKY was a radio station in Oklahoma City, and then they came to Kiowa. So you were married in 1971, and then you moved to Stillwater, where Christy finished her English degree at OSU.
Well, I'm chuckling because that was part of the deal. I had just graduated. Vietnam was looming out there. I went ahead and enlisted and went to Kansas City and took my physical and did not pass the physical. I had some health conditions that I just didn't pass it, but I decided to get it out of the way. I was involved in protests of the Vietnam War, but I also would have gone. And once that was out of the way, we decided to get married. I was the one who really wanted to get married, and she finally said, "Okay, but I'm going to finish my work at Oklahoma State." So I went to Oklahoma State. We moved to Stillwater. We got married. we got married in August 6th, and I've already said that we'll celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary this year. I needed a job, so I got a job at a local freight company. I went to work at 4:30 in the morning, but I've already said I grew up on the farm. I grew up on the back of a hay truck. Work was not something that was foreign to me. I went to work at 4:30 in the morning, and we began to unload the huge trucks that would come in overnight. And by 8 o'clock, I was working in back alleys of Stillwater delivering freight. But I grew up on the back of a hay truck, and I grew up working for my uncles and my grandparents. Work was not something that was foreign to me. Right. And I would finish the day loading up boxes of paper at more business forms. Often I would work from 4:30 until 9 or 9:30 at night. But I was married to the love of my life, and she was finishing her degree, and it was a good time.
But you had a teaching degree and maybe sending out letters to schools?
John, that is an uncanny question. I wrote over 100 letters, and I believed that I needed to hand type them. And so I hand typed over 100, and then I quit counting, trying to find a teaching job. But when you're undergraduate major, I could teach one of two things. I could teach psychology, or I could teach speech, and that's all. And so I didn't get a job.
But then Christy graduates, and she gets an English teacher's job in Coweta Public Schools. And as I understand, the superintendent hired her, and that meant she wanted you to have a job in the system as well.
That is another great story, John. The superintendent at Coweta at the time was a former BOAG teacher. Christy's father, Ellie Castle, is in both the Oklahoma Agriculture Hall of Fame and in the Vocational Agriculture Teachers Hall of Fame. As far as I know, he is the only person ever from Oklahoma that is in both of those Hall of Fames. And right away, the superintendent had picked up from her transcript that Christy was Ellie Castle's daughter. And by the way, I absolutely loved my father-in-law. I had the absolute greatest relationship with him. So we're in there, we're interviewing, and the whole interview, the first time, is all about Christy Castle Ballard, who her father was, because the superintendent, I don't know if I said this or not, was a former BOAG teacher. And he declared immediately in that interview that Ellie Castle was the best BOAG teacher that this state had ever seen. And he also farmed on the side. They had a huge farming operation at Jet, but he farmed and taught. So the whole interview centered on Christy and what he had. And at one point, I said, literally, about an hour into the interview, I said, "What about me?" And he looked at me and he said, "What about you? You can teach one of two things. You can either teach psychology, or you can teach speech. Now, we have some openings at Coweta Junior High. What do you think you're going to teach? Are you going to teach psychology, or are you going to teach speech? Now, I'm going to tell you this. We have openings for your wife, and we want to hire her, and we understand that you are a package deal. We have some needs to be met. Little did I know what those needs were, and we will be talking with you. And so I've already lined out what I was doing, John. I was going to work at 4:30 in the morning. I grew up on the farm. I am a hard worker, but I was getting weary of that. And it was the spring, and we were uncertain. My wife picked me up one evening from the freight dock, and she said, Mr. Brent's called us today, and he wants both of us to come on Saturday, and he wants to talk to both of us about a job. And I said, surely you're being serious. Don't kid around about this. And she said, I'm serious, and he has something in mind for you. Did he ever? So we go down and we meet with him on Saturday. He offers my wife a contract teaching high school English, and he turned to me, and this just shows what foresight that this guy had. The superintendent at Coweta turned to me, and he said, okay, we have several kids at Coweta Junior High who have difficulty reading, and we need to confront that issue. We need to see what we can do to get them on track. This was a monumental moment in my life. It was divine intervention is what I've always called it. And he said, I've checked your transcript. It's very good transcript, not quite as good as your wife's, because my wife only had one B in all of her college career. I don't need to tell you what the other grades were. They were all A's. But he said, you have a good transcript too. And I've done some checking. And if you will go back and take 9 hours of reading somewhere, anywhere, I don't care where, I will hire you to work with junior high kids who can't read. That was a huge turning point in my life and in my career, because we were going to work on the farm. That's what I did from the time I was 14 years old, was run a combine, a hay truck, and tractors. So I go back home. I was scheduled to work for her father at Jet, Oklahoma, only about 25 miles from Alva, Oklahoma, which had Northwestern Oklahoma State University. I go back, I talked to her father, and he said, sure, if that's what it takes to get a job, yes, we will work around that. So I go over to Northwestern at Alva, and I talked to two ladies who had spent their entire career in the reading specialist program. And so I decided I would take 9 hours that summer. I would become certified, and I would teach junior high kids who had difficulty reading. It was a turning point in my life, John. because I absolutely love that program. I love those two ladies who had never married and spent all of their adult career in preparing people as reading specialists. I love that program. And I would go on to get my master's degree as a reading specialist. I would say 2 years at Coweta. I was also the head coach of the 7th, 8th, and 9th football team last year that I was there. And that was just kind of a chance thing. They needed someone to help out with the 7th grade football team. I was talking about football with one of the coaches. I actually played one spring at Fort Hays State. I had a few offers to play college football, and so I was not lacking in experience. So I coached the 7th grade first year there, and then they made me the head coach for 7th, 8th, and 9th. And that's what I was doing at Coweta. And as a part of our work, they would send me to scout other teams on Friday night. That was my first introduction to Oologah. We drove across that lake and went to the most spectacular facilities ever. And I really was enamored with Oologah. One day, I was just casually looking through job openings, and they had an opening for a reading specialist at the high school. I would graduate that summer with a master's degree as a reading specialist. I was just curious about the job. Christy and I called the high school principal, and immediately he said, I want to talk to you. You're saying that you have a reading specialist degree. We're putting in a program at the high school where we're going to work with kids who do not test at 10th grade or above with their reading level. And so we go over and we talk to the superintendent and the high school principal, and they hire us. And my wife was working on her master's degree in library science. And they said, well, by coincidence, we're going to open a library at junior high and elementary level. And if you have your degree in library science, your master's degree, and you worked out as a teacher, then we will hire you for the library position. We would move to Oologah after only 2 years at Coweta, and we liked Coweta. And we would stay 18 years, and I was the superintendent of schools when we would leave there.
That was Tulsa Public Schools. So,
yes.
Then, while you're there in Oologah, you start taking classes in school administration, and you earned your administrative certificate.
Well, that is an interesting story as well. The only place in Oklahoma where you can get a master's degree in library science is OU. So I was there. I needed to take something. Like I say, I was there in Norman. My wife was going to school, and I just feel like that much of what happened in my life was meant to be, because I was there in Norman, and I enrolled in administration classes, and I took a couple of summers of administration classes, and I was very close to being certified, so I came back and I enrolled in the program at TU. I would end up in the doctorate program at TU, but I wouldn't finish my doctorate because by then we started having children, and I just didn't want to commit the time. So we were at Oologah. I was hired, and I worked for 3 years in the reading program, and then thanks to the fact that I enrolled in administration classes at Norman and decided to finish it at TU, I was fully certified. We had a new superintendent come to Oologah, and one of the board members said we had a real turnover in administration, and one of the board members said to the new superintendent, Lonnie Parrish, who came from Oologah, he was truly a blessing in my life. And one of the board members said, there's a guy teaching in the reading department at the high school, and I think he has his administrative certificate, and he has a really good reputation as a teacher. You really ought to talk to him. 1 week into Lonnie Parrish's first week on the job, he had the high school, he had his secretary call me, and she said, the new superintendent wants to talk to you. And I said, how do you even know who I am? What does he want to talk about? And she said, he didn't say. And so I went on Friday and talked to Lonnie Parrish, and he revealed that he had been told that I was a good teacher and that I had my administrative certificate. Would I be interested in joining the administrative team? And that is how I got into administration at Oologah. I would just say this, John. I did absolutely everything. And by everything, I mean every assignment possible in preparation for the superintendent's job. And by that, I mean truly, I was director of transportation, I was over finance, I was over curriculum, I was even the athletic director. I did everything under Lonnie Parrish, and then I would succeed him as superintendent. And my wife was the librarian. She taught English for a year, and she was the librarian at Oologah. We would say 18 years.
So you're about 36 years old then, I think, when you took Lonnie Parrish's position.
Yes, that would be about right.
Okay, then there was a defining moment there in Oologah because it was April 26th, 1991, an F4 tornado.
At 9:44 p.m.
Say that time again?
At 9:44 p.m.,
Yep.
April 26, 1991, 9:44 p.m. Largest natural disaster ever to strike a school in the history of the state of Oklahoma.
It caused $10.5 million in damage. It was an F4 tornado. And so then tell us what you did. You obviously had to go out and speak in the community and to discuss the disaster and the recovery. Tell us about that moment.
It was a huge learning experience. I already knew about the importance of communication, of building relationships. That was what I built my career on, listening to other people, communicating. And we managed to rebuild that school in approximately 70 days. And it attracted a huge amount of attention. I was in the doctorate program at Oklahoma State. I was working on my dissertation, and my advisor called me, and he said, Keith, you're going to do your dissertation on the aftermath of the tornado and the reconstruction. I said, I'm already into my dissertation. I don't want to shift off. He said, this is the largest natural disaster ever to strike a school in the history of Oklahoma. You're doing your dissertation on disaster preparation and recovery. Well, who was I to argue with? He was the chair of my committee. It turned out to be a very fortunate thing for me. We did rebuild the school. We did start on time. We had enormous difficulties replacing the entire transportation fleet. Fortunately, I had a guy by the name of Bob Boyd, who was my deputy superintendent at Oologah, and he was actually a cabinet maker on the side, meaning that he really understood reconstruction. He really understood and was an expert in that area. And with Bob's help and my holding the community together and working with the community like I did, next thing I knew, I was on the circuit. I was getting regular phone calls from people. It was, after all, the largest natural disaster ever to strike a school in the history of the state of Oklahoma. So I went on the circuit, and little knowing that it would have a transformational impact on my career. I had a very high profile. I was talking all the time about disaster preparation and recovery, and then the offers began happening. I won't even divulge where some of the offers came from. All I'll say is that Bill Salwachter was retiring from Claremore, and Claremore was in close driving distance to Oologah, where my wife was very happy. By then, she was the high school librarian, had been for several years, very happy with her job. And I got a call from Claremore wanting me to interview for the job. I will just be candid and say that I didn't really want to leave Oologah, although those were very tumultuous and difficult times. It wasn't without a lot of stress, but I didn't even go interview for the job. On the day that the applications were due, I get a phone call from a board member who says, "We're looking through the applications. We don't have yours." And I said, "Well, I've decided not to apply." And they really wanted me to apply. They wanted to talk to me about how we had rebuilt Oologah. So eventually I said, well, I'm not going to apply for the job, but I will come talk to you. And so I went there. I talked to the board members. I was so impressed by the board. I really did not want to leave Oologah, but they really made it attractive. And my worry was about my kids. Matt was going into the 10th grade, and you know who Matt is. He's the district attorney here in Claremore at the courthouse. And Michael was going into the 4th grade, and Michelle was going into the 6th. I wanted to take the Claremore job, and they were really pursuing me for it. But I did not want to move my kids. And then Matt, my oldest, going into the 10th grade, came and had a heart-to-heart talk with me. And what he said was, the kids and I will move. We will move, Dad. We will do it willingly. We held a meeting. That's actually what he said. A 4th grader, a 6th grader, and a 10th grader held a meeting, and they would be very willing to go. So the rest is history, John. I took the Claremore job. I absolutely loved living in Claremore. That's where my home still is. And I took up believing that I would stay in Claremore forever.
Yeah.
That is how I ended up at Claremore.
Yeah. And that's, we should point out, you'd been in Oologah for 18 years, so it was difficult to uproot there. But while in Claremore, then, you became involved with education initiatives at the state level. You served as president of the Oklahoma Association of School Administrators and United Suburban Schools Association, as well as helping form the Oklahoma Education Coalition. So you were able to be superintendent of schools and then get involved in those positions in the state.
I was very active in state organizations.
So then you went in the year 2000, the Oklahoma State School Boards Association, they were looking for an executive director, and you took the job because you wanted to affect legislation and state policy. And I think you trained school boards and you were working with state leaders. You might comment on that.
I was only the 3rd executive director of the Oklahoma State School Board Association, OSSBA in 50 years. And I was approached by Bob Mooneyham, who was the outgoing executive director. He had stayed 25 years, and his predecessor, who started OSSBA, had stayed 25 years. I was doing a lot of speaking at different, I was very active in the Superintendent Association, and I was doing a lot of speaking. I was speaking at various, I spoke every year at the OSSBA conference, and Bob Mooneyham approached me a year before he retired, and he said, I'm retiring in 1 year, and I want you to take my place. So I was unsure because my kids were in school, and Michael was going into his junior year. We did not want to move. My wife was a couple of years away from retiring. she was still at Oologah, and so we had a lot of things to work through, but I interviewed for the position with the executive committee on the State School Boards Association, and I absolutely loved everything about it. It was the opportunity to go to the state level. My wife and I worked it out where we would buy a condominium in Oklahoma City. We would stay with our home in Claremore. Michael would graduate. She would finish out her time before retirement. And we ended up taking the job at OSSBA, and now I am involved at the state level. I absolutely love that job. I loved the interaction at the state level. I worked with the governors. I worked with speakers of the House and pro tem of the Senate. It was a great time, and I really, really enjoyed it.
And at the same time, you were adjunct instructor with the University of Oklahoma, and then you were going to finish your career as a professor there. But then one day you received a phone call that you never, ever expected to receive. And
that is very true. I did receive a phone call, and the president of the Board of Education at Tulsa Public and vice president of the board wanted to talk to me. Now, in my role as executive director of OSSBA, I worked with, I did board training extensively. We not only had a department that did board training, I personally did a lot of board training. And I had worked with the Tulsa Public Schools Board of Education on more than one occasion. The president and vice president of TPS board wanted to talk to me. Look, I lived in Claremore. I read the paper. I was good friends with the superintendent of TPS as well as Oklahoma City. And I knew that there were divisions going on and that there was a very difficult time. I personally liked the superintendent, but he really didn't know how to bring groups of people together. He wasn't very good at communicating. He was old school in that he believed in top-down leadership. So I get this phone call, and I go meet with the president and the vice president of the board. I truly believe, John, that they wanted to talk with me about the difficulties that their superintendent was having in the community. I knew him really well, and I met with him frequently. I actually opened the discussion at lunch that day defending him. And I was mistaken about what they wanted to talk to me about. I thought they just wanted to discuss their superintendent's difficulty that he was having. And so I launched into urban superintendents are hard to find. You have a well-intentioned person here who really has a lot of attributes. He understands research. He is really a good guy. You need to hang on to him. I really did not know that they had decided they were going to buy his contract out, and they wanted to talk to me about the job. I had no idea. And I actually opened the conversation with defending it. And then the board president and vice president said, it's probably gone too far. He is not going to be able to survive in this job. We have initiated discussions with him about buying him out. Would you be interested in the job? I will just be candid here and say that I did make it clear that it was not going to be predicated on whether or not I would take the job as to what they would do with their current superintendent. In fact, I finished that conversation that day by saying, you go back and you work out your differences with this superintendent. And my advice is that you work to keep him. But if you don't decide to keep him and you work out some kind of agreement on departure, then and only then will I discuss the prospects of being the next superintendent at Tulsa Public. Now, I went home. I have to include this. I went home and I told my wife what they wanted, and I simply said they want to talk to me about being superintendent in Tulsa. Should they not be able to work out their differences? And my wife kind of scoffed and said, yeah, sure. What did you say to that? No. And I said, actually, I said yes. She had her back to turn to me, and she spun around and she said, what? You actually said that you would go back? I said that I would consider it. And she said, why? Why would you do that? And John, my answer was spontaneously, because that's what I am. And that is how I see myself. I see myself as a superintendent who was blessed with several opportunities. I think it is significant that I said in that moment in time, without even thinking about it, because that's what I am.
Yep.
And the rest is history.
Yep. And then you
ended up.
You became superintendent in October of 2008. And let me just jump through here something that you can comment on that. And I'm well aware that your voice is getting weaker, and so I want to work with you here. You can comment on some of these. You brought in Teach for America as a Teach for America site in 2009. You secured a $354 million bond issue in March of 2010. It was the largest school bond measure in state history. And you also included in that a field house at McLean High School. There might be something in there that you would like to comment on.
I don't know how you know that, but I really tried to bring a wide open perspective on everything. And McLean needed a new field house. They needed that. They were, having difficulty identifying who they were. McLean was a really good high school. I loved going to McLean. Yes, it was a troubled high school. And so I am a very inclusive leader. I believe very strongly in input and figuring out and taking into consideration the will of the people. And I had a very strong board of advisors on all bond issues. And what happened was that group did not want to build a field house at McLean. And so I finally said, we won't build any field houses if we don't approve building a field house at McLean. We won't build any. And it is your decision. You need to tell me as my advisory what you will and won't do. But it is extremely important to me that we build that field house at McLean. And I will tell you this, John, I can be an emotional person. And when I read in the newspaper last summer, I believe it was, about the field house opening at McLean, I literally wept. Mm-hmm. And it was a spontaneous outburst of emotion. I pick up my Tulsa World, which I read absolutely every day of my life, and I saw that the field house in McLean had opened, and I was just overcome with the emotion, because every child deserves the absolute best opportunity, and we needed to build that field house at McLean. Yeah. And I did take a tough stance, but fortunately, if you're into building relationships and people trust you, and I really believe that I behaved in a manner that incited trust, that caused trust, and when I took that very firm position, then they agreed that we needed a field house at McLean, just like some of the other high schools.
Yeah, and
that was an important part of my legacy.
Yeah, that's a great story. By the beginning of the 2010 and 11 school year, Tulsa Public Schools was facing many major challenges, and I'm coming now to Project Schoolhouse. You assessed all 89 schools in the district over a 6-month period. You collected as much information as possible. And then in May 2011, TPS board approved the Project Schoolhouse plan, resulting in the closing of 14 school buildings to eliminate 5,600 empty seats and to save the district about $5 million a year. Project Schoolhouse, it moved 6th graders to elementary schools, relocated 7th and 8th graders to separate areas of high school buildings, or kept them in middle school buildings, which were renamed junior highs, to better prepare them for high school. But this is a Project Schoolhouse, you had to sell and to call on your contacts that you had in this community.
Well, I think by then that the community knew what I stood for, and that was absolutely building relationships, and I had done that. I had done that in every aspect of the community. In particular, I paid a lot of attention to the clergy, because people always believe they're pastors, and I would be with all, I had all kinds of advisory groups. I met regularly with all kinds of advisors, but I had a group of pastors that I met with regularly, and I had built that relationship with them, and people listen to their pastors. That's not why I formed those relationships. I formed them because of the respect that I have for the clergy. But I do believe that my relationship with the pastors had a lot to do with Project Schoolhouse being successful. And we had so many community hearings. We did not enter into it with our minds made up. In fact, I wanted to sell mail. I had an agreement in place. I thought that we would keep mail intact and the kids would just relocate in a vacant school. I went up there that night to several hundred people, and I listened very carefully to what they had to say. And I knew that when I left there, that was not a good idea. I remember very well driving away that night from mail and calling my wife on the phone. And first thing she said was, "How did it go?" And I said, "Just fine." And she said, "Tell me about it." It was a volatile meeting. And so I told her all about the meeting. I still remember pulling out of that parking lot and my wife saying to me, "Just exactly what was it that you thought went well?" Because it was rather tumultuous. And my answer was, because I got my answer. And that group that night changed my mind. And I believe that that is an attribute that I had that I didn't think because I climbed into a chair that I was the end-all be-all. I did not believe that I had all the answers. Rather, I was a steward of the community, and I needed to listen very carefully. That's not to say that I didn't take hard stances when I believed. Case in point, we already talked about McLean. But I think that Schoolhouse was successful because we really listened. We didn't have our mind made up, and we knew that we needed to consolidate, and we knew that we needed to save money. But the one issue that came after that really says it all. That we would have that kind of support after going through Schoolhouse, that we would have that kind of support, that kind of a large bond issue. And I believe the percentage passed was 86.7% or thereabouts. For me, that is the defining moment and the importance of forming relationships, of listening carefully, of communicating with people, and not believing because you climbed into a chair that you had all the answers. You don't. And so I think that last bond issue, which I had a public display of emotion, I think that really says it all.
Yep. Nice honor, too. You received a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Yes.
I don't know, were you involved in politics in any way? And I know you inserted yourself in the state superintendent of schools race. Joy Hoffmeister was elected, and the incumbent was Janet Barisi, the sitting state superintendent. And she was defeated, but was this about as active as you were in a political race?
Yes. I was very careful about taking positions. But Jen Breesy was toxic, and she was not good for the state of Oklahoma. She really believed that because she made it into a chair that she was the only thinker in the room, that her opinion is all that matters. And that flew in the face of every belief that I had. And then when she threatened to actually announce that she was closing one of our high schools without even consulting with us, that was the last straw. And so we became, lack of a better term, we really did become enemies. And a lot of people thought that I was going to run for state superintendent. I actually had breakfast with Joy Hofmeister, who was on the board at that time, and she was superb. She was a person who believed, like I did, that relationships matter, that getting input matters. She was absolutely a spectacular board member. I wanted her to run. She thought that I was going to run. And at that breakfast, I said, Joy, I'm not going to run. My family situation is not conducive to me running. I don't want to run. I don't want to be state superintendent. Now, whether she was right or not, her answer was, but everybody wants you to run. And I said, I'm not going to run. And if you think I'm going to, you're going to be disappointed when the day after the sign up ends. And if you want to run, you're going to be disappointed because I'm not going to run. I'm not going to do that. Long pause, and she said, well, I guess I better go file then. She is a phenomenal person. She really is. And Christy and I got absolutely behind her election, and Breesy, who was toxic and not a good leader. In fact, she embodied and exhibited all of the traits that I was opposed to. Just because you make it into a chair, you are not the only thinker in the organization. Rather, it is a sacred position. A sacred position that people have placed their faith in you, and you better communicate, you better involve people, and do all you can to exercise the will of the people. I'm not saying that you don't take stances. I think my record is pretty clear that I took stances, but you must do it on building relationships.
Yeah. Didn't you, after she was defeated, didn't you run into her someplace?
Yes.
And what did she say to you?
She was not happy about it. And actually, she did an interview, and I think this is what you're referring to. She did an interview after she was defeated, and she did state in that interview that the one person who was affected in getting her removed was a failure as a superintendent. So I'm sure that she had hard feelings toward me, but she did not behave in a manner. And her saying that I'm going to close and take over a Tulsa Public Schools flew in the face of everything that I believe. There is a reason that people elect board members. It is a locally controlled institution. I believe very much in local control and in input from the community. It is too important not to have that. So Jen Parisi and I, we parted ways, and yes, I supported Joy very strongly, and I do believe that Joy has been a spectacular superintendent of Oklahoma schools.
And currently, you have a position now with the George Kaiser Family Foundation Chair in Leadership at the University of Oklahoma, Tulsa.
I love teaching. I am a teacher at heart. Thank you for asking that, John. I always believe, I believe that I resigned from the State School Board Association to go to that position. And then TPS happened. And I'm glad that TPS happened. But I ended up leaving TPS because I am a teacher at heart. And I felt called, I felt led to draw from my experiences and take it to the classroom. I absolutely love what I am doing as the George Kaiser Family Foundation professor in working where I work. And I absolutely love teaching. I love the classes that I teach. I've even joined the online program this year. Dr. Greg Garn was he was Dean of the College of Education when I took over this job. And he recently was elevated into Director of all online programs. I wasn't sure, John, that I even supported online programs, but I've always prided myself on being open-minded. So I agreed to teach the class politics in educational administration. I agreed to teach it, and I took the training for online. And I realized that I was wrong, that I could deliver as quality of a class via online instruction as I could face-to-face. And I'm very excited about the program. And even with my illness, I continue to teach. I know my voice is faltering, but I'm going to work around that. I am a teacher at heart, and I love teaching. I believe that I was led through my entire career to culminate as a university professor, to share my experiences and my philosophies with students who will one day lead schools.
What is the biggest threat to public education today?
That's really a good question. I do believe that adequate funding is a threat. We must make sure that we are meeting all of the needs. Also, there's a movement going on out there against public schools. And while I support the charter movement, and I really do, I opened some charter schools that I believe were in the best interest of students. But there is an unrest going on out there about public schools. we must do all that we can to combat that. I will just say public opinion is a threat.
Yep. Now back to the challenge you're facing. What are you drawing on now from your on this? You've talked about your faith challenges in the past. What is it you're drawing on as you face this challenge?
Well, I'm drawing on my faith for sure. And I'm drawing also on family. I'm really glad that you asked that question. Every single Friday night, I have 7 grandkids at my house. We play cards, we eat. At any given time, I have 7 grandkids who live very nearby. At any given time, they can show up. Actually, today, we have 2 grand dogs who showed up this morning. And I draw and I get a lot of strength based first and foremost on my faith. We have always been very active in the church. I am a person of faith. I have a great relationship with my pastor, and I talk with him regularly. But I also draw on my family. And I am very grateful that and I'm just going to say it, a poor kid from Kiowa, Kansas would have all of the opportunities that I have had. I am so grateful. And to be down in the mouth, to exhibit irrational behavior would be a slap in the face to all the trust that has been placed in me. I intend to face this illness with dignity, with class, and with courage. I intend to be positive. I intend to do the work that I'm doing. I built the online class from scratch. I grew upon my many experiences in my years of experiences. I have been truly blessed. I do believe that I fulfilled what God's mission for me was. And now it is time for me to give back. And I will do that through the online class. I actually started from scratch in writing it. On January 25th, I started that class, and on January 28th, I teach profiles in effective leadership. I draw upon absolutely fabulous speakers like G.T. Biden and others, Chris Binge and Mike Neal. The list is Andrea Eager. The list is endless. Relationships that I have formed. I am here for a reason. I will fulfill my mission on earth. I refuse to play the part of woe is me. I absolutely refuse to do that. I will stay busy. Fortunately, now this disease does not affect cognitive ability. I am very fortunate that I got to go to the Mayo Clinic and I got to find out what is wrong with me. And I pray every day, and I have legions of people praying every day for my health and for my ability to cope with this. I'm really glad that you asked that question, John, because I absolutely intend to face this with a very strong reaction, and I intend to be positive. I realize that I am a public figure and that a lot of eyes are on me, but that is who I am.
Yep. And then those who may be listening who are also facing ALS, they take inspiration from what you've just said. How about young students thinking about a career in education? It seems like maybe there doesn't seem to be as many young people that are anxious to become educators. What would you say to them to encourage them to get into education?
That is a great question. It is a wonderful life. It is a fulfilling life. I didn't really intend to go into it, but I was led into it, and I am so thankful. So I would give this message. It is a rewarding career. It is a fulfilling career. It is a career of giving to others, and it is a magnificent career. I am fortunate that as I look back over my life, I would not change anything. I believe that I followed God's will. I believe that I utilize my capabilities to the fullest. It is a great career, and people ought to go into it because of the rewards.
And a question that I ask all my oral history in my interviews is, how would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as a person who genuinely cared about making a difference in this world. That really sums it up. I genuinely cared about making a difference. I listened. I communicated. I involved people in the process. I would also like to be remembered as someone who knew how to involve and motivate people to do the right thing for children.
Well, you will be remembered that way. And let me just say how much I admire you in your career, but also the way you're handling this ALS and the fact that nearly 2 hours you've talked with strength, and I'm sure it hasn't been easy. We've understood you, and that you would even do this, as I admire a lot. And so this will be listened to by generations to come, beyond you and beyond me. And that's why we do Voices of Oklahoma, so that the future generations can learn, and they will learn a lot from listening to you. So I thank you, Keith, on behalf of the community, those professionals, your former staff people, all the people in the education business are joining me right now and saying, thank you, Keith Ballard, for what you've done for our state.
Thank you, John. I have enjoyed this. I appreciate the opportunity. I admire and I respect your work as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. God bless.
God bless you.